In the frozen chaos of a Pacific foxhole, with Japanese artillery hammering the coral sand like the fists of an angry god, one Marine whispered words that no enemy could ever understand. Those words, ancient, unbreakable, spoken in a language older than America itself, would save thousands of lives and help win the bloodiest war in human history. But the secret behind them was so astonishing that even the US government kept it classified for decades after the last shot was fired. This is the true story of the Navajo Code Talkers, woven through the eyes of one young man who carried the fate of nations on his tongue. It is not fiction. Every battle, every code word, every act of impossible courage happened exactly as history records it. Only the heart of the man who lived it is ours to follow. Private First Class Samuel Begay pressed his back against the rough trunk of a shattered palm tree on Guadalcanal, August 7, 1942. The air smelled of salt, cordite, and fear. His helmet was too big. The Marine Corps had issued it to a boy who had never worn shoes until he was 12. At 21, Samuel was one of the first Navajo recruits chosen not for his rifle skills, but for the language he had spoken since the day he could walk. His grandfather had told him the old stories in the hogan under the stars, stories of Changing Woman and the Hero Twins, tales that had survived Spanish conquistadors, American cavalry, and the Long Walk of 1864. Now those same stories were being turned into a code the Japanese Imperial Army would never break. He gripped the radio handset, sweat mixing with the blood from a shrapnel cut above his eye. Enemy tanks advancing on the left flank, came the frantic English call from the command post. Samuel didn't repeat it in English. Instead, he spoke rapidly in Navajo, the syllables rolling like the wind across the red rocks of Arizona. Dibe yaji donakit lol bichin yigal. Enemy tanks approaching from the left. The code was simple yet genius. Navajo words substituted for military terms the Japanese linguists had never studied. Turtle meant tank, hummingbird meant fighter plane, iron fish meant submarine. The Code Talkers had invented it themselves in a secret room at Camp Pendleton, California, months earlier, under orders so classified that even their own families would not learn the truth until 1968. Samuel's message flew across the static-filled airwaves. 30 seconds later, American artillery roared in reply, obliterating the Japanese armor before it could reach the Marine lines. Lives saved, a beachhead held, and no one on the Japanese side had the slightest idea how it had happened. Back home in the Navajo Nation, life had been anything but simple. Samuel was born in 1921 on a wind-swept mesa near Window Rock, Arizona. The same year, the U.S. government finally granted citizenship to all Native Americans. His father had fought in the trenches of World War I with the 36th Infantry Division, returning home to a country that still barred Navajos from voting in many states. The family raised sheep, spoke only Navajo at home, and sent their children to boarding schools where teachers beat them for uttering a single word of their own language. Speak English or be silent, the nuns had commanded. Samuel learned both, Navajo by firelight, English by force. When Pearl Harbor burned on December 7, 1941, Samuel was shearing sheep on the reservation. The next day, he walked 30 miles to the nearest recruiter and volunteered. The Marine Corps recruiter took one look at the quiet, broad-shouldered young man and asked, "You speak that Indian language real good?" Samuel answered in perfect English, "Yes, sir, and it's Navajo." By March 1942, he and 28 other Navajos were locked inside a guarded barracks at Camp Pendleton, California. No one outside the room knew what they were doing. They created a dictionary of over 400 code words, then practiced transmitting under simulated combat fire. Japanese intelligence had cracked every other American code within weeks, but Navajo was a tonal language with no alphabet, spoken by fewer than 50,000 people on Earth, most of them living on a reservation the size of West Virginia. The enemy never stood a chance. Samuel's first real test came on Guadalcanal. The island was a green hell of jungle, malaria, and Japanese bonsai charges. On the night of October 23, 1942, the Marines faced the largest Japanese counterattack of the campaign, 3,000 elite troops screaming across the Matanikau River. Samuel and Chester crouched behind a machine gun nest. Bullets snapped overhead like angry hornets. Chester kept the radio, while Samuel translated orders so fast his tongue grew raw. Send reinforcements to the ridge, now, became a stream of Navajo that reached the command ship offshore. Within minutes, Navy dauntless dive bombers screamed down, their bombs turning the Japanese assault into a slaughter. By dawn, the Marines held the line. Samuel would later learn that his messages had coordinated the exact air support that broke the back of the enemy division. He never bragged. He simply said, "The holy people were watching." The war followed Samuel across the Pacific like a relentless storm. Bougainville in November 1943, mud so deep it swallowed men alive, and Japanese snipers tied into the trees. Saipan in June 1944, civilians throwing themselves off cliffs rather than surrender, and the first time Samuel saw a flamethrower turn a bunker into an inferno. Tinian, Guam, Peleliu, each island a new circle of hell, each battle a new test of the code. At Peleliu, the Japanese commander had ordered his men to kill the Code Talkers first. Somehow they knew the Navajos were special. Samuel survived an ambush that killed 3 of his platoon by diving into a shell crater and transmitting coordinates while Japanese grenades bounced off the lip above him. His message, "Iron fish moving toward Beach 2, brought a destroyer's 5-inch guns down on the enemy position. The code held. The beach was taken. By February 1945, the war had reached Iwo Jima, a sulfur-stinking rock 8 square miles of black sand and volcanic ash. Mount Suribachi loomed like a demon. Samuel landed with the 5th Marine Division on D-Day, February 19. The first wave was cut to pieces by hidden machine guns. He crawled forward over bodies, radio on his back, and set up in a shell hole only 50 yards from the waterline. The Japanese were waiting in a honeycomb of tunnels. For 36 days, the battle raged. 26,000 American casualties, nearly the entire Japanese garrison wiped out. On the 4th day, Samuel watched 6 Marines raise the American flag on Suribachi. He did not cheer. He was too busy transmitting the coordinates that kept the flag raisers alive long enough to plant it. Photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment for the world, but Samuel's code kept the Marines from being slaughtered while the cameras clicked. What made the code astonishing was not just its speed. Transmissions in Navajo were 3 times faster than any mechanical cipher machine, but its absolute security. The Japanese captured one code talker on Saipan and tortured him for weeks. He gave them nothing because the code was never written down. It lived only in the heads of the talkers. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers revealed they had assumed the strange language was some kind of Native American dialect, but could never translate a single word. One enemy cryptographer later admitted it was like trying to read the wind. Samuel carried more than messages. He carried the weight of his people. Back on the reservation, his mother still wove rugs by lantern light, wondering if her son was alive. His little sister had died of tuberculosis in a government boarding school, the same schools that had tried to erase their language. Yet here he was, using that language to save the very nation that had tried to destroy it. The irony was not lost on him. In quiet moments between battles, he would pull out a small medicine bag containing a pinch of corn pollen and pray in Navajo to the holy people. The other Marines, roughnecks from Brooklyn and Texas, began to respect the quiet Indian who never seemed to sleep and whose voice on the radio meant survival. On August 15, 1945, the war ended. Samuel was on Okinawa when the news came. He sat on a crate of K-rations, listening to the cheers, and felt nothing but exhaustion. He had transmitted over 1,200 messages without error. Not one was ever decoded by the enemy. When he returned home in 1946, the Marine Corps gave him a Bronze Star and a handshake. No parade, no mention of the code.
The government classified the entire program until the 1960s. Samuel went back to the reservation, married a Navajo woman named Mary, raised 4 children, and never spoke publicly about what he had done until 1982, when the Code Talkers were finally honored by Congress. But the real story, the one history books still miss, is what happened inside Samuel. He came home carrying ghosts. The boy who left the mesa had become a man who could close his eyes and still hear the screams of dying Marines on Iwo Jima. He watched his people struggle with poverty and discrimination while the country he had helped save celebrated VJ Day with ticker tape parades that never included Navajos. Yet he never regretted a single word. In 1992, at a reunion in Washington, D.C., Samuel stood beside Chester Nez and the last surviving Code Talkers as President George H.W. Bush presented them with congressional gold medals. Samuel, now 71, spoke softly into the microphone. "We did not fight for glory. We fought because the holy people gave us this language and the Marines asked us to use it. That is all." He died in 2005, buried with full military honors at the Navajo Veterans Cemetery near Window Rock. His headstone reads simply, Navajo Code Talker, USMC. But the true monument is invisible. Every American who lived through the Pacific War owes their freedom, in part, to a language the world almost forgot. The code itself was never written down in full. The dictionary the original 29 talkers created in 1942 still exists only in the memories of those who used it and the families who preserved the language against every attempt to erase it. Samuel's children and grandchildren still speak Navajo. They tell the stories around the fire, the same way he once did. And somewhere in the halls of the Pentagon, a declassified file sits on a shelf stamped secret, containing the words that helped win the war against impossible odds. That is the astonishing truth. A handful of young men from the poorest tribe in America, using nothing but their voices and the wisdom of their ancestors, did what no machine, no cipher, no army of codebreakers could do. They became the Unbreakable Code. The wind still blows across the red mesas of Arizona, carrying the same words Samuel Begay once spoke into a radio on a distant island. And if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can almost hear them, ancient syllables riding the breeze, reminding anyone who will listen that the greatest weapons are not always made of steel. The story does not end with medals or graves. It lives on in every American schoolchild who learns the names Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and in every Navajo child who grows up knowing their language once saved the world. Samuel Begay never sought fame. He only wanted to go home to the sheep and the stars. But the stars, it turned out, had other plans. They needed a voice, and the voice was Navajo.
Samuel Begay and his fellow Code Talkers didn't just win battles. They proved that the most powerful weapon in war isn't a bomb, a bullet, or a battleship. It's culture. It's language. It's the unbreakable spirit of a people the world tried to silence, but who ended up saving the free world. Their story was hidden for far too long. Today, we finally tell it the way it deserves to be told. Raw, real, and unforgettable. If this story moved you, shocked you, or filled you with pride, remember their names, honor their sacrifice, and never forget that sometimes the quietest voices become the loudest thunder in history. Thank you for listening to The Unbreakable Tongue. If you love powerful, true stories from history that they don't teach enough in school, make sure you subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. We bring you epic, deeply researched, cinematic stories every week. No fluff, just pure history that hits you in the soul. Drop a like if Samuel's courage inspired you. Comment Navajo Strong below to honor the Code Talkers, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The next chapter of American heroism is already loading. See you in the next story. Stay curious, stay grateful, never forget.